yourself and what is your expert in filmmaking?
Okay, I'm Paul Cornelius. I teach at Mahidol University in the International College's Fine and Applied Arts Division. And there I teach film and TV critical studies for the most part, although I also teach courses such as storytelling and visual communications and things like that. My research interests in film, and it primarily is a film research, although I do some TV work as well there too. But I like to do 20s and 30s German film, Nazi film. I also since I've come here especially, I've done images of Southeast Asia, an American film, and a Hollywood film, and also Vietnam films, Vietnam War films.
So today a lot of today's class is about iconography and genre studies and conventions. How does that come into play in filmmaking?
Well, two different things. For a film scholar, the study of genres is actually a study of ritual behavior on the part of people, and it's sort of a reaffirmation of culture. When people constantly re-experience the same stories told with the same tools, the same icons or tangible objects that carry that iconographic meaning, and the conventions and the performances of a genre, that tends to reaffirm cultural patterns. It actually is something that's almost religious in a way. And if you're a film scholar or a TV scholar studying that, that's what you're interested in doing, is seeing how society's concerns and traditions are being carried out through the film medium. As for making film, I think it's a little bit of a different story there. We do know, for example, if you know anything about the early history of Hollywood, and about how you got things like log lines on treatments, that came as a sort of shorthand for early movie studios being able to sort of file away scripts they would be able to then film or look up to use later on. So it's actually part of a industrial sort of cataloging process that has then been adapted to, I think, a lot of screenwriting and scripting formalities since then.
Can you give us an example of a popular convention, say in a Western or any type of major genres that we normally see in a film?
Sure, a showdown at a duel where the sheriff's at one end of the street and the outlaw or the savage or the bandit is at the other end of the street, and you get a series of close-ups. One of the interesting things you might want to look at, some are, of course, filmmakers are very much aware of that and they play on it. Go look at the end of Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where you don't just have two people facing off with each other, you actually have three, I believe, facing off with each other, and you get close-ups and the camera actually circles around instead of simply cutting back and forth.
What is your opinion about mainstream films and films that actually utilizes these iconic and conventions? What is the main difference between film that are, as you mentioned, textbook film and films that we see in theaters today?
I think virtually every film, to some degree, is a genre film if it's going to have any sort of audience reception. And by that I mean there are symbols and conventions that are common to virtually every film across every culture. And these are the things that make film broadly accessible to audiences. The uniqueness of a film, if you want to also call it the high art of a film, is something that works against that. There's a tension involved between genre and sort of uniqueness. For example, if I want to give you a novel to read, a typical Mickey Spillane detective story, that's about as simple and a cliched of a genre experience in literature as you can possibly expect to find. However, if I take you out and give you, say, an experience reading James Joyce's Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake, that is, on the other hand, so unique, has such a limited range of potential audiences that it's not going to have the same exposure. So you're sort of having a tension always involved here between something that may seem overly cliched for general audiences and something that may seem so rarefied that it's not going to appeal to too many people. The audience for Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses is a very small audience. The audience for Mickey Spillane is a pretty big audience.
You mentioned cliche and using it and properly balanced. Can you comment on the fear of new independent filmmakers points of being cliche?
Everybody wants to be unique, and that's understandable. I notice with my students all the time that they're always fearful of being too cliched in their stories. And they're always coming out to me and say, isn't this too much of a cliche? And I say no, and then they all go out and do mafia stories.
So how would you comment, what should a filmmaker look at in terms of visual references and sound references in order for them to maybe practice or get the right idea of what can they use to improve their film? What can they look at?
I think first of all, a filmmaker needs to look through his own personal experience, through his own personal lens. And then you can take almost any subject, any genre subject, as cliched as it may appear, and then when you apply your personal lens, your personal experience to it, that's what's going to make the difference.
Since this is your time with us at SAE, can you comment about the facilities and the courses here and what you bring to the table with your masterclass?
Well, what I tried to do with this masterclass is sort of emphasize some of the more scholarly approaches, and at the same time, some of the more routine approaches to storytelling and scripting. And I realize that is because SAE wants to be more than merely a vocational school. It actually wants to teach its students to think, and to, instead of just transferring knowledge to them, you actually want them to be able to apply knowledge in a creative way. So that's some of the principles I tried to use in the masterclass here today.
And lastly, what are some tips and tricks and suggestions to upcoming filmmakers or film students? What can you give to them as, say, the word of the wise?
Don't be afraid to watch old films. Watch as many films as you can, but also read history, read literature. Find your inspiration from a variety of sources. You might go online and read science journals as well. If you want to make a science fiction film, there's all sorts of interesting stories and points of inspiration floating out there in real science today that you can use as a departure point. So yes, read the press, read literature, read good literature, although it's really strange in a way, because one of the things we've discovered in studying films is generally the higher the quality of literature, or I should say, the higher the quality literature is regarded, often the lesser the film quality. On the other hand, sometimes books and novels and stories that might be considered cheap pot boilers have made great films. So that's the type of literature you read is no key to determining the eventual success and the artistry of your eventual film. One of the great films, of course, is Gone with the Wind. And I still don't think Gone with the Wind is a very good novel. Some people may disagree, but I don't think it's a very great work of literature, but it's a great film. So those two often are not in tandem.